You won't be joining us on the family cruise. My wife prefers to keep it just family." Those words came from my only son, the same son I had handed a fully paid house to just months ago. A house that cost me years of savings, sleepless nights, and every ounce of strength I had left. I gave him security, a foundation for his new family. And now, I wasn't family enough for a seat on their vacation. I stared at that message, my chest tightening. The phone burned cold in my palm, while the kitchen I built around love suddenly felt like a stranger's room. Before I continue with my story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. The screen dimmed, but the words were already seared into me. I typed a single response, one word: "Okay." My finger hovered for a second before pressing send. It was as if in that moment, I signed the death certificate of the softer part of me, the part that excused, that justified, that believed a mother's love would always be enough. I set the phone down on the counter and listened to the hollow quiet of my own kitchen. The refrigerator hummed like it always did, the clock ticked steadily, but none of it felt familiar. I leaned against the cool stone of the countertop, the same countertop I had chosen carefully 10 years ago when Matthew first moved back in with me after college. I remembered sanding down the wooden chairs with my late husband Richard, painting them white so they would look new again. I remembered sewing those curtains by hand, pale yellow with tiny flowers, because Emily once told me yellow light made a home feel cheerful. Every piece of this room was built for them, and now it was only a museum of sacrifices no one valued. My chest ached, but my eyes stayed dry. For once, I didn't reach for a tissue, didn't pace in circles asking myself what I had done wrong. I just stood still. The light from the phone had left a faint rectangle on the counter, as though the message itself had burned its way into the wood. I whispered into the empty air, as if Richard could still hear me. "Did you see this, Richard? Did you ever think the boy we raised could turn me into a stranger in my own family?" The sound of the heater kicking on broke the silence. I moved to the kitchen table and sat down, staring at the framed photo that used to hang on the wall but now lay face down on the shelf. It was on Matthew's wedding day. Emily had been radiant, Matthew nervous but beaming. I had believed that day was the beginning of something permanent, a family that would expand, not shrink. I remembered Emily clutching my hands, tears glistening as she whispered, "You'll always have a place with us, Olivia." I believed her. I wanted so badly to believe her. The irony tasted bitter now. I had signed over the deed to their house only months ago. I told myself it was a gift, a foundation for their future. Richard and I had saved every penny, and after his passing, I promised myself our boy would never struggle. I stayed up late countless nights, running numbers, moving funds, selling the little cabin we used to visit in autumn, just to make sure the payment was complete. I thought I was securing love. What I had secured was my own exclusion. The phone buzzed again, and I flinched, half hoping it was Matthew taking it all back. Instead, it was Emily, polite but cold. "I hope you understand, it's just simpler for everyone this way." Simpler, that word sliced deeper than the rest. Simpler now that they had the house. Simpler now that they could pretend I was invisible. I set the phone down as if it were a poisonous thing. My hands trembled slightly, but not from tears. No, there was something else rising in me, something steadier. I poured myself a cup of coffee, though I didn't really want it. The steam curled into the air, dissolving quickly like all the promises I had held on to. My breath was shallow, my pulse too loud in my ears. Yet on the outside, I was composed. That was always my talent. Smile when you're bleeding, nod when you're breaking. I had done it for years. But as I sat at that table, the old habit felt like a costume I could no longer wear. The phone remained on the counter, screen dark, as if waiting for me to beg. I didn't. Instead, I stared at the empty wall where the family photo once hung. The absence felt honest. I reached up and touched the spot, the faint outline still visible from years of dust. It looked cleaner now, truer, like the wall had been waiting for this moment. I whispered again, this time not to Richard but to myself. Enough. That single word filled the room heavier than my son's rejection. Enough of swallowing hurt, enough of excusing cruelty, enough of calling disrespect love. Something inside me hardened into resolve. I didn't yet know what steps I would take, but I knew the woman who had sent that one-word reply was not the same woman sitting in this kitchen now. The morning sun began to creep across the tiled floor. It lit up the edges of the rug I had bought for Matthew and Emily's first apartment, the one I thought would make their space feel homier. I realized in that moment that almost every choice I made in the last decade was for them. Every trip I funded, every loan I paid, every weekend I sacrificed to help. My own life had become a shadow behind theirs. And now, with a single message, they told me I wasn't family. I picked up the photo of Richard again, his smile frozen in time. He had always warned me not to give away too much, not to let our son grow dependent on gifts instead of responsibility. I never listened. Love made me blind. Generosity made me soft. Now I was paying the price. I held the photo closer and whispered, "Richard, I think it's time I listen." I stood, my legs unsteady but my spine straight. I walked through the kitchen slowly, touching the back of each chair, the edge of the counter, the curtain fabric. These were symbols of devotion, but they no longer belonged to me in spirit. They had become relics of a role I could no longer play, the role of the giver who was never invited to sit at the table. By the time the clock struck 8, I had made my decision. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't plead. I wouldn't send another word to Matthew or Emily. Silence had always been my weakness, but now I would make it my strength. I would let my silence become sharp, a tool, a shield. The Olivia they thought they knew, the soft, unquestioning mother, was gone. The phone buzzed again, another message I didn't bother to read. I picked it up, pressed the power button, and set it face down on the counter. The kitchen filled with light as the sun rose higher, golden rays spilling across the floorboards. I drew in a deep breath, steady and full. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like breaking. I felt like beginning. And that is how the story truly started. Not with a cruise I wasn't allowed on, not with a house I no longer owned, but with a single word I sent back. Okay. One word that marked the end of my silence and the quiet beginning of my fight. I sat alone in the kitchen long after the phone had gone quiet, the silence pressing on me like a second skin. The light shifted across the tiles, warming the wood beneath my feet, but I felt colder with each passing minute. It was strange, the way rejection makes you revisit every sacrifice, every moment where you told yourself it was worth it. My mind did what it always does when pain comes knocking. It wandered back through time, cataloging the evidence of my own choices. I thought about Disney. Matthew was 8 years old, his face painted like a pirate, chasing after parades with his plastic sword. Richard and I had saved for months, cutting corners on groceries, delaying car repairs, so we could give him that week of magic. The trip had cost more than it should have, but I told myself memories were priceless. Emily wasn't there then, but when she joined the family years later, she delighted in hearing the story, as if the generosity was hers by inheritance. Then Cancun. That trip had been Emily's idea. She said Matthew was working so hard that they deserved a break. I pulled out my checkbook quietly, telling them it was an early anniversary gift. The photos were beautiful, their tans glowing, their smiles wide. I stayed home with Martha that week, planting flowers in my garden and telling myself this was enough. I didn't mind, I said. It brought me joy to give them joy. And then the cabin at Christmas. A 2-story rental tucked in the snowy pines, a place straight out of a movie. I had rented it for all of us, thinking perhaps a shared holiday would bind us tighter. I cooked, I decorated, I made sure Matthew and Emily's room had the softest blankets and lavender-scented candles. I watched Emily hold Matthew close by the fireplace, whispering about how perfect it all was. When she squeezed my hand and said, "You always know how to make things special, Olivia," I believed she meant it. Maybe she did. Or maybe it was simply easier for her to let me believe. The montage of memories played against the blank wall where the family photo once hung. Each scene vivid, each sacrifice sharp. I realized I had spent years curating a museum of my own mistakes, filling it with evidence of devotion mistaken for security. My eyes landed on the shelf again, bare except for Richard's brass lock. It was a small, old-fashioned padlock, one he gave me after our 30th anniversary. He'd said, "When we close the mortgage on our first house, let this lock remind us that some doors are worth keeping shut." He was half teasing, half serious. Richard always believed in limits, in boundaries. I didn't. I thought love was limitless, a well you could pour from forever. Now that the lock sat silently, accusing me of not listening, another memory pulled me forward. Housewarming day. The spring sun had been kind that afternoon, spilling across the new front porch as guests gathered with balloons and bottles of wine. Emily wore a pale blue dress that made her eyes sparkle. She guided me through every room, thanking me, hugging me, her voice sweet with gratitude. At one point, she stopped, squeezed my hands, and whispered, "You'll always have a room here, Olivia. This is your home as much as ours." I wanted to believe that promise. I swallowed it whole, desperate for it to be true. But the promise rang hollow when I thought about the weeks before that party. I had spent days in that house alone, repainting their master bedroom because Emily had decided lavender walls would be soothing. I remember the smell of paint clinging to my hair, my hands aching from holding the roller. I ordered their furniture online, assembling bed frames and side tables in my garage like some hired worker. I hung the curtains. I had stitched myself. I wanted it to be perfect for them. Every nail hammered was a prayer for their happiness. Looking back now, it felt less like a gift and more like an erasure. My presence was in every detail, but once Emily and Matthew moved in, I became invisible within those same walls. I tried to shake the thought off, but another memory slipped in, one that hadn't fully registered until now. The notary. It had been Emily's idea. She insisted we make things easier, just in case of an emergency. She had brought the notary to the house herself, smiling that practiced smile that could disarm anyone. I remember signing papers without reading closely, trusting her explanation that it was just routine. She had said, "This way, if something ever happens, we can handle bills quickly, manage the house without hassle." I thought it was thoughtful, but tonight, that memory pressed like a thorn. Why had she been so eager? Why did she organize the meeting herself? At the time, I told myself she was simply efficient, a woman who liked things tidy. But in the quiet of this kitchen, I saw it differently. Maybe it had been the first step in a plan she never admitted out loud. I rose from the table and walked to the window, pulling the curtain back slightly. Outside, the neighborhood looked unchanged. Lawns still manicured. Children still riding their bikes. Neighbors still waving to one another. Yet inside my chest, something fundamental had shifted. A question, sharp and undeniable, had begun to sprout. Had I signed away more than I realized that day? I sat down again, resting my elbows on the table, my hands pressing against my temples. I didn't want to think badly of Emily. She was, after all, the mother of my grandchildren. But hadn't she always been a little too polished, a little too rehearsed in her gratitude? She cried when I handed over the deed, but her tears dried quickly when the paperwork was complete. I had chalked it up to nerves, to youth. Now I wondered if it had been performance. The kettle whistled on the stove, startling me. I hadn't realized I had turned it on. I poured hot water into a cup and set a tea bag inside, watching the color bloom slowly, clouding the water with amber. The slow spread reminded me of suspicion, how it seeps in quietly until everything tastes different. I carried the cup back to the table, my gaze falling once again on Richard's lock. That small, stubborn piece of metal suddenly seemed like the only thing honest in the room. It whispered of boundaries I had failed to keep, doors I had opened too widely. I thought of how I had smiled at the notary that day, how I had ignored the flicker of unease because Emily's voice was so soothing. "You're like a second mother to me," she had said once. Maybe that was the biggest lie of all. My tea cooled as the house grew darker, shadows stretching long across the floor. I sat in that fading light, cataloging my mistakes, seeing them for what they were. A lifetime of giving without asking, of offering without guarding, of mistaking being needed for being loved. The museum of my life was crowded with such artifacts: Disney tickets folded neatly into scrapbooks, receipts for vacations I never took, paint-stained clothes from hours spent making a home that was never mine. The more I thought, the more the word simpler echoed in my head. Emily's text had been the final brushstroke. Simpler now that they had stripped me down to nothing but the giver, the wallet, the background. Simpler to exclude me, to erase me politely. I reached for my phone again, but didn't turn it on. Instead, I slid it into the drawer and closed it. I couldn't stand to see their names lighting up the screen anymore. If they wanted silence, I would give it to them, but not the way they expected. As I rose to turn off the kitchen light, my hand brushed the lock again. I picked it up this time, the brass cool and heavy in my palm. Richard's voice echoed faintly in my memory. "Some doors are worth keeping shut." I slipped the lock into my pocket, where it clicked softly against the fabric. A reminder. A promise. When I finally walked down the hall to my bedroom, the house felt both emptier and clearer. The K-Trong without the photo no longer haunted me. It felt honest. The missing frame had been replaced by something more powerful. Resolve. I lay down in bed, the lock still in my pocket, and let the memories swirl. Disney, Cancun, Christmas cabins, lavender paint. A lifetime of giving replayed like a slideshow behind my eyelids. But this time, instead of feeling only the ache, I began to feel something new. Suspicion, yes, but also clarity. Perhaps I had given away too much. Perhaps Emily had been preparing all along. And perhaps, just perhaps, I wasn't powerless after all. The thought soothed me as I drifted toward sleep. Tomorrow, I promised myself, I would start pulling at the threads. For now, the night would hold my secrets, and the lock in my pocket would guard them. I woke before dawn, though I hadn't really slept. My body felt heavy, but my mind was restless, circling the same words until they carved grooves into my thoughts. "You won't be joining us, just family." That message replayed like a cruel lullaby I couldn't shut off. I moved to the kitchen because that was where I always went when I didn't know what else to do. The clock above the stove blinked 5:12 a.m., its steady red numbers more honest than the people I had trusted. The house was too quiet, and silence had a way of making the truth louder. I poured coffee and held the mug close just for the warmth, though I couldn't taste a thing. My hands trembled again, and not from age. I hated that they shook like that. I hated that my son's words could still make me feel small. For a moment, I wondered if I was losing my grip on reality. But then I remembered the lock Richard had left me, still on the counter, solid and cold. It grounded me. By 8, I knew I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I reached for my phone with deliberate calm, scrolled through the short list of numbers I still trusted, and pressed one. Martha Lewis. I have been friends with my friend for nearly 30 years, the one person who had sat through every storm with me, who never asked for explanations before offering comfort. When Martha walked in less than an hour later, she didn't bother to knock. That was the kind of friend she was. She stepped into my kitchen with the same presence she always had, a small purse slung over her shoulder, her eyes sweeping across my face before I even spoke. She saw it instantly, the fracture behind my calm. "Tell me," she said, her voice low but steady. I slid the phone across the table to her, the screen already open to the message. She read it in silence, her jaw tightening. She didn't look surprised. I watched her lips press into a thin line. "Olivia." she finally said. "I've been waiting for this." Her words made my stomach drop. Waiting? What do you mean by waiting? Martha sat down across from me, folded her hands, and spoke with the bluntness I both loved and feared. "You've been shrinking yourself for years, Liv. You made yourself useful, always the fixer, the wallet, the babysitter, the rescuer, and they learned that's all you would ever be." I flinched. It stung because it was true. She continued, her eyes sharp but kind. "They don't see you as Olivia anymore. They see you as an ATM with a warm smile." The words sat between us like a knife. I wanted to argue, to defend Matthew, to say Emily had twisted things, but my throat closed, because deep down, I had known it too. I just hadn't wanted to say it aloud. Martha reached across the table and took my hand, grounding me. "Liv, I need you to hear me clearly. You've been generous to a fault, and now they believe that generosity is their right. You gave them a house outright, didn't you? Not even a gift of equity, but a full deed transfer?" I nodded, ashamed. I thought it would make things easier for them. No mortgage, no debt. A clean start. Martha's sigh filled the room. "Easier for them, yes. Harder for you. And did you keep any rights? Any life estate? Did you stay on the title?" I shook my head slowly. "It was all theirs. Outright." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if steadying herself. "Then you need to check everything else. Your accounts, your bills, your property taxes, all of it." My pulse quickened. "I don't even know where to start," I admitted. "Emily said she'd take care of most of it for tax reasons. She set up the online banking, the auto pays, and the property insurance. I thought she was being helpful." Martha's eyes opened again, sharper than before. "That's the problem, Liv. You let her run it." Her words cut deeper than Matthew's text had, because they weren't cruel, they were true. For a long moment, we sat in silence. The coffee between us had gone cold. The kitchen, once a place of warmth and effort, now felt like a boardroom where my life was being audited. The wooden table where I had hosted birthdays and family dinners was now a war table. I whispered, almost to myself. I didn't want to see it. Martha squeezed my hand. "Of course you didn't, but not wanting to see doesn't stop the damage. They've been planning this, Liv. I know it." I blinked at her, shocked by the certainty in her tone. "Planning? You think this wasn't just careless words?" She shook her head firmly. "Emily doesn't make careless moves. She's too polished for that. Everything she does is precise. And Matthew, your son, he's let her do it because you've always picked up the pieces for him. He never had to fight for anything. Why would he start now?" The truth hit me like cold water. I thought of Matthew's face when he first got the keys to the house, how relieved he looked, how grateful. But gratitude had melted into expectation, then into entitlement. I pulled my hand back, needing space. My eyes drifted again to Richard's lock on the counter. That stubborn brass piece sat there like a witness, reminding me of the boundaries I'd ignored. Martha followed my gaze and nodded toward it. "You see, even Richard knew. Some doors should never be opened without caution." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "So what do I do?" "You start by taking back control," she said. "First step, log into everything yourself. Every account, every card, every utility. Make sure your name is where it should be. Second, check the deed. Make sure Emily hasn't already tied your old house into anything. And third, call your financial advisor. Get a clear picture before they get ahead of you." The room felt smaller as she spoke, the air denser. My heart pounded, but not from fear this time, from recognition, from the clarity of someone finally calling things by their right names. A tremor of guilt still tugged at me. "They're my family, Martha. What if I'm overreacting?" She leaned closer, her eyes fierce. "Family doesn't lock you out of a cruise after you buy them a house. Family doesn't cut you off with a text. Family doesn't hide finances under the name of convenience. That's not family. That's exploitation wrapped in politeness." Her words tore through the last of my denial. For the first time, I saw my situation not as a sad accident, but as a pattern. And once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. The kitchen clock ticked on, marking each second of my awakening. I looked around at the space that had once been a sanctuary and now felt like a crime scene. The chairs, the curtains, the photos, they were all props in a play I had directed, thinking it was love, while the actors rewrote the script without me. Martha leaned back, letting her words settle. "Liv, it's time to stop being invisible in your own life." Her statement landed heavy but true. I nodded slowly, my voice steadier than I expected. "You're right. I've been too quiet for too long." Martha's lips softened into a small smile. "Good. Then let's start today." I exhaled, long and slow, as though releasing decades of excuses. The morning light shifted again, falling directly on the table between us. For the first time, the room didn't feel suffocating. It felt like a command center, and I wasn't just a victim sitting at it. I was about to become the commander. That was when the first tremor of real resolve sparked in me. A fragile flame, yes, but one that could grow. And as Martha poured fresh coffee into my cup, I realized that sometimes the harshest truths are the ones that save you. I wrapped my fingers around the mug, steadier now, and whispered almost to myself, but loud enough for her to hear. "The soft part of me died yesterday. What's left is going to fight." Martha nodded. "Then, let's make sure you fight smart." The kitchen, once a museum of sacrifice, had turned into a war room, and for the first time in years, I was ready to take the first shot. It was the kind of night where silence felt heavier than sound. I had tried to sleep, turned the pillow again and again, but my body resisted. My mind kept circling back to Martha's words, sharp as glass. She told me to check everything. Stop assuming, stop trusting, stop hoping. At 2:17 a.m., I gave up the pretense of rest. I slid out of bed, feet hitting the cold floor, and made my way back to the kitchen. The lamp above the table cast a low yellow glow across the room. It was the kind of light that made things look older, as if the years themselves were leaning over my shoulder. I pulled my laptop from the drawer, the one Emily had once called outdated. She had insisted on upgrading me to something sleek, but I had clung to this machine like a relic because I trusted it. Tonight, it felt less like an old friend and more like the last key I had left. The screen came alive with a soft hum, the cursor blinking expectantly. My fingers hovered over the keyboard longer than I'd like to admit. I wasn't sure what frightened me more, the possibility of finding nothing or the certainty of finding too much. Still, Martha's voice echoed. "Ignorance doesn't stop damage." I logged into my bank account. At first glance, everything looked ordinary. The balances seemed consistent with what I remembered. I almost let relief wash over me, but something tugged at me to keep scrolling. So I did. Line by line, transaction by transaction, utilities, groceries, small donations. Then, tucked in between the mundane, I saw the first oddity. $187 labeled home repair, $243 labeled maintenance. My brow furrowed. I hadn't approved any home repairs. My own house was paid off years ago, and the property Matthew and Emily lived in was theirs outright. Repairs for what? I clicked deeper. The rabbit hole widened. There were dozens of these small transfers, scattered over months, none large enough to draw immediate attention, but together they painted a picture of someone quietly siphoning. The destinations were worse. They weren't listed under my name. Instead, they were routed to a secondary cardholder, Emily Gardner. I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering. My breath hitched, as if the air itself had grown thicker. My daughter-in-law had attached her own name to my accounts. Not as a one-time mistake, but as a permanent fixture. The cursor blinked over the words "authorized representative." My hand froze on the mouse. My stomach sank. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Mr. Whitaker's number. He had been my financial advisor for years, a calm voice guiding me through investments and retirement planning. He would know. He had to know. He answered with the same warm professionalism he always had. "Good evening, Mrs. Gardner. What can I help you with?" I forced my tone to remain casual, though my throat was dry. "I just wanted to review some account structures. Emily has been helping me handle household finances. I'd like to confirm everything is still set up as originally intended." There was a pause as he pulled up my file. I tapped my finger against the table to steady myself, watching the cursor still blinking on that fateful line. "Well, everything looks generally stable," he began, "but I do see some recent activity. Several fund transfers have been scheduled, mostly categorized under renovations." Renovations. The word lodged in my chest. I hadn't approved any renovations. My voice came out tighter than I intended. "And who authorized these transfers?" Another pause. His tone shifted slightly, less casual, more careful. "Well, technically, you did. At least your authorized representative account did." My hand tightened around the phone. "Which representative?" This time his hesitation was audible. "It appears that Emily Gardner, listed as your secondary authorized user, processed these. She has full access under the durable power of attorney you signed last spring." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table, needing the solid wood beneath my palm to keep from unraveling. Spring. I remembered it clearly now. Emily had arranged the notary, smiling all the while, insisting it was just for convenience, just in case of emergencies. I had believed her. I had signed without looking too closely because she had called it a safety net. But safety nets can strangle. I swallowed hard, forcing steadiness into my tone. "Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. From now on, I'd like all future transactions flagged for my personal review before processing. I'm going to be more hands-on moving forward." "Of course, Mrs. Gardner," he said. His voice was calm, but beneath it, I heard the unspoken. He knew what I had just uncovered. When I hung up, I stared at the laptop screen again. The cursor still blinked on authorized representative, as though mocking me. My own name was still there, yes, but hers was tethered to mine like a parasite. Durable power of attorney. Durable meant immediate, not something that waited until I was incapacitated, not something that only mattered in emergencies. It was in effect now. I pressed the laptop shut with a quiet click. The sound echoed too loudly in the still kitchen. My reflection stared back at me from the glossy cover, pale and drawn, eyes too wide. I whispered to that reflection, "You signed away more than you realized." I pushed the laptop aside and leaned back, letting the shadows press around me. Emily hadn't just been efficient, she had been deliberate. Every sweet smile, every helpful gesture, every claim of wanting to protect me, it had all been architecture, and I had walked willingly into the structure she built, blind and eager to trust. The refrigerator hummed again, steady and indifferent. The clock ticked on, each second slicing through the night. I thought about Richard, about how he would have seen this coming. He had always been cautious with paperwork, always reading the fine print. I had prided myself on being the softer one, the trusting one. Now I saw how dangerous softness could be when handed to the wrong hands. I rose from the table, pacing the small kitchen, the floor cold against my bare feet. Every object in that room looked different now. The curtains I had sewn for them. The chairs are painted white. Even the coffee maker Emily once suggested I upgrade. All of it was evidence, not of love, but of my complicity in my own erasure. I returned to the table and touched Richard's brass lock. Its weight steadied me. Some doors are worth keeping shut. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had opened too many. For the first time in years, I wasn't panicking. I wasn't crying. I was calculating. Martha was right. They had been planning this. Emily hadn't just stumbled into access, she had orchestrated it. And Matthew, my son, whether through ignorance or indifference, had allowed it. I sat back down, my hands folding calmly on the table, though my heart still raced. The cursor inside me, the one that had always blinked, yes, keep giving, keep excusing, keep trusting, it stopped. For the first time, it went still. I didn't know all the steps yet, but I knew this. The Olivia who signed without reading, who trusted without question, who equated silence with love, she no longer lived here. The kitchen clock struck 3. I closed my eyes, took a steady breath, and whispered into the heavy night. They think they've written me out, but I still hold the pen. The cursor on that account screen would blink again tomorrow, waiting for permission. But tonight, I had already decided. Permission would no longer be given. The morning after that long night felt different. I had barely slept, but my body was fueled by something sharper than rest. Focus. Resolve. The sun broke across the blinds in thin slices, laying pale stripes across the wooden floor. I shuffled into the kitchen, the same room that had transformed itself from sanctuary into war table. The lock Richard had left me still sat at the edge of the counter where I had placed it before bed. Its brass face caught the morning light, as if reminding me not to forget what I'd seen. I made coffee out of habit, though the taste didn't matter. What mattered was what came next. I kept replaying my conversation with Mr. Whitaker, hearing his voice as he confirmed the truth I had avoided for too long. Emily's access wasn't potential. It was real, immediate, and durable. She already had a hand in my accounts. The shock of it still pulsed in me, but it had calcified into something else overnight. Anger, dressed as clarity. The house was silent, and in that silence, I heard the faintest sound. A soft shuffle at the door, paper sliding against wood. My chest tightened. I walked toward the front hallway slowly, my slippers whispering across the floor. There it was, a plain white envelope sitting on the welcome mat, sunlight falling across it like a spotlight. I bent down, my knees stiff, and picked it up. On top, a sticky note in Emily's rounded handwriting. "Just sign whenever you're ready, Mom. It'll make things easier." My breath caught. That phrase again. Easier. Always easier. Easier for whom? I carried the envelope back to the kitchen, setting it down beside Richard's lock. The two objects sat there together, one a symbol of boundaries, the other a weapon disguised as paperwork. My hands trembled as I tore the flap open, but I forced myself to stay calm. Calm was my weapon now. The papers inside were neatly typed, perfectly formatted. At first glance, they looked like routine updates, streamlined estate planning, consolidated authority, simplification, but the deeper I read, the colder my blood ran. It was an irrevocable power of attorney, not limited, not temporary, not narrow, comprehensive, permanent, all-encompassing. The language was dressed up in politeness, legal phrases strung together to mask the brutality underneath. It granted Emily Gardner control not just over my finances, but over my medical decisions, my property, my entire life. If I signed, she would own me. Living, breathing, but erased. I sat very still, the clock ticking too loudly on the wall. My fingers hovered over the pages, but I didn't reach for a pen. Instead, I folded them back into the envelope carefully, gently, as if preserving evidence from a crime scene, because that's what this was, evidence, proof of intention. I set the envelope down again next to Richard's lock. The contrast was brutal. One object is heavy and honest, the other lightweight but venomous. Together, they told the story of the line I had to draw. My phone buzzed on the counter, startling me. I grabbed it, half expecting another message from Emily checking in sweetly about whether I had signed. Instead, it was a call from Mr. Harris, the private investigator Martha had insisted I hire. "Good morning, Mrs. Gardner." His voice was steady but carried a weight that made my stomach clench. "There's something you need to know." I gripped the phone tighter, staring at the envelope on the table. "Tell me." "We've been tracking filings connected to the property you transferred," he said. "Yesterday, while you were at home, Emily Gardner submitted documents for a pre-approval. They've listed the house as collateral for a second mortgage. The words hit me like a physical blow. I pressed my free hand against the table to steady myself. They were already borrowing against the house I had given them outright. The house they promised would always include a room for me. Mr. Harris continued, his tone professional, but I heard the quiet anger beneath it. If you hadn't started this process now, they could have secured the loan within weeks. The paper trail would have made it look legitimate, and with the durable power of attorney, Emily had all the authority she needed. The room swam for a moment, my breath shallow. My own son and his wife had tried to build debt on top of my gift. They weren't just erasing me emotionally, they were gambling with my entire security. I forced my voice to stay steady. Thank you, Mr. Harris. Please keep documenting everything, every step they take. Of course, he said. We'll have a full report ready for your attorney by the end of the week. When I hung up, I stared at the table. The envelope, the lock, the phone. 3 objects, 3 truths. Emily's handwriting pretends care. Richard's lock reminds me of strength. Mr. Harris's words confirm betrayal. The clock ticked again, loud enough to feel like a heartbeat outside my chest. Each second carried its own message. You waited too long. You trusted too easily. But you are not finished. I reached for the lock, curling my fingers around it. I whispered into the empty kitchen. They think this is still their game. But they've underestimated me. The house felt different now, not like a museum of mistakes, but like a courtroom waiting for evidence. Every photograph, every chair, every curtain was testimony. And now I had Exhibit A, an envelope slipped under my door, asking me to surrender my life with a smile. I didn't sign. I wouldn't sign. Instead, I slid the envelope into a drawer and closed it softly, almost ceremonially. It was no longer a request. It was a confession. I poured a fresh cup of coffee, though my hands still trembled slightly. Sitting back at the table, I let the morning light spill across me, warming my face. The warmth didn't erase the cold truth, but it reminded me that I was still here, still breathing, still fighting. The silence of the house stretched long, broken only by the tick of the clock. It no longer felt like an ordinary morning. It felt like the beginning of trial preparation. And as I sat there, the lock heavy in my pocket and the envelope hidden away, I made myself a promise. If Emily wanted a war of paperwork, then I would fight her with the very tools she thought she owned. I whispered it aloud, a vow to no one but myself. You thought I was soft. You thought wrong. The tick of the clock answered, each beat steady, each second louder. I had my first piece of evidence, and I was ready to use it. The morning after I tucked that poisonous envelope into the drawer, I made my first deliberate move. Not toward Matthew, not toward Emily, but toward the people who knew how to weaponize paper and ink in my favor. I dialed the number Martha had scribbled on the back of a grocery receipt weeks earlier, Dalton and Pierce, attorneys at law. The receptionist's voice was crisp and kind. She scheduled me for a same-day consultation. That alone gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in months. By noon, I was stepping into an office lined with books that smelled faintly of dust and leather, the kind of smell that whispered authority. Mr. Dalton rose from behind his oak desk as I entered. He was tall, silver-haired, with a measured handshake that told me he had seen battles far uglier than mine. Please, Mrs. Gardner, sit. Tell me what brings you here. I slid the white envelope across the desk. He opened it carefully, his eyes scanning the irrevocable power of attorney with clinical precision. He didn't flinch, didn't sigh, but his jaw tightened just enough for me to notice. This, he said, is not convenience. This is control. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel crazy. I felt heard. I told him everything, the durable POA I'd signed in spring, the late-night discoveries on my laptop, Mr. Whitaker's confirmation, Harris's call about the second mortgage attempt. Dalton took notes in neat, slanted handwriting. Then he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Here's what we'll do," he said. "First, we file to revoke and rescind the durable POA you signed. It will require notification, but it can be done. Second, we'll prepare a protective clause stating that no powers of attorney may be valid unless accompanied by your wet signature before a notary of your choice. That strips them of digital loopholes. Third, we'll build a timeline. Every instance of manipulation, every signature they hustled you into, every financial maneuver. That timeline will become our sword and shield." His words came like bricks, one after another, forming a wall I could stand behind. "And the house?" I asked quietly. He gave a small nod. "You gifted it outright. That complicates things, but not fatally. If we can demonstrate undue influence or coercion, we may have grounds to reverse the transfer, especially paired with the attempted second mortgage. Courts do not look kindly on elder financial exploitation." The phrase made me shiver. Elder financial exploitation. It sounded clinical, almost sterile, yet it was the perfect name for what Emily had tried to cloak as care. Dalton wasn't finished. "I'll also contact a forensic auditor. If your daughter-in-law has tied her name to your accounts, we need to track every cent. That way, if they attempt to argue innocence, we'll have hard numbers to dismantle the story." That afternoon, he introduced me to Harris formally, though I had already spoken with him on the phone. Harris was lean, with quick eyes and a calm presence. He laid out his plan like a detective mapping a crime scene. "We'll start with card usage. Every purchase is linked to her as an authorized user. We'll trace withdrawals, transfers, and any accounts opened under her maiden name or alternate IDs. Most people hide in plain sight, Mrs. Gardner. They think a different label makes them invisible." I nodded, my heart pounding but steady. For once, the chaos wasn't swirling aimlessly. It was being harnessed, directed. That evening, I sat at my own kitchen table again, but the air felt different. No longer oppressive. It was mission air. The sound of paper sliding across Dalton's desk still echoed in my ears. Each form he had promised to file was another stone in the wall I was building. Days passed in a blur of signatures and filings, revocation notices, protective clauses, statements sworn before notaries who looked at me with polite sympathy. Each stamp of ink felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. My name, no longer floating on documents Emily carried, my authority, no longer diluted by digital permissions. I requested one additional safeguard. From this day forward, I told Dalton, no transaction on any account should be valid unless I sign it in ink. No automatic withdrawals, no digital approvals. Wet signature only. He smiled slightly. "That's old-fashioned, but in your case, brilliant. It cuts out every shortcut they could take." Meanwhile, Harris worked quietly in the background. He sent me short updates in concise emails. Patterns emerging, multiple transfers categorized as home repairs. Secondary account linked to Emily Gardner, born Emily Price. A shadow account under Price's name was flagged for investigation. Each message thickened the file Dalton kept on his desk. I visited weekly, watching the stack grow. At first, it was a slim folder, then a binder, then a box. Every page was a piece of armor. And yet, beneath the satisfaction, there was unease. One afternoon, Dalton leaned across his desk with a new document in hand. "They're planning something." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He slid the paper toward me. Harris intercepted communications indicating Emily and Matthew had scheduled another POA draft with a notary. They arranged it to coincide with their cruise departure. Dalton's eyes met mine. "That trip isn't just a vacation, it's cover. They plan to return with a new document in hand, claiming you consented." The breath caught in my throat. They were relentless. Every smile, every note, every gesture of care, they were camouflage. Dalton leaned back again, but forewarned is forearmed. We've already filed the revocation. Any new document will be null unless signed under your chosen conditions. Their cover is already blown. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting relief mix with grief. Grief that I had raised a son who stood beside someone orchestrating this. Grief that trust had been weaponized against me. At home that evening, I placed the growing stack of my copies on the table. The papers lay heavy, yet they didn't suffocate me. They empowered me. I touched Richard's lock again, now resting atop the stack like a paperweight. Boundaries, enforced. The days fell into rhythm. Meetings with Dalton. Quiet updates from Harris. Each time, I walked away steadier. The fear that once tightened my chest had been replaced by something else. Ownership. For the first time in years, I owned myself. Sometimes at night, doubt still crept in. Was I really going to war against my own son? But then I would remember the sticky note in Emily's handwriting. Just sign. It'll make things easier. And I would feel the weight of the lock in my hand. Some doors must stay shut. The file grew thicker, and with every page, I grew too. By the end of the second week, Dalton placed the full binder before me with a finality that made the air hum. Mrs. Gardner, you now have a wall so solid they can't climb it. You've turned the tables. I pressed my palm against the cover, feeling its weight, and whispered to myself, I'm not invisible anymore. The reservation was for 7 o'clock sharp. A small neighborhood restaurant, nothing flashy, nothing loud. Just quiet enough that every word spoken at the table would land clearly, without distraction. I had chosen it deliberately. Neutral ground. Not my home, not theirs. A place where polished cutlery and soft lighting would remind us all that appearances mattered. When I walked in, the hostess smiled and led me to a table by the window. I requested one with a clear line of sight to the corner booth, where Dalton had already taken his seat with a glass of water and a newspaper propped open. He didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge me, but I knew he was there. Harris had taken up a seat near the bar, his phone in hand, pretending to scroll. My army didn't need uniforms or weapons. Their silence was enough. At exactly 7, Matthew and Emily entered. Emily wore a pale blue dress, one I had once complimented her on. Matthew's shirt was pressed, his smile rehearsed. They looked like a couple stepping into a stage play. When they saw me, their smiles widened. Mom, Matthew said, leaning in to kiss my cheek, it's so good to see you. Emily echoed him, her voice sugary. We've missed you. This is such a thoughtful idea. Dinner together. I let them sit, let them order drinks. The clinking of glasses around us, the murmur of other diners, the occasional scrape of a chair, all of it formed a soundtrack of ordinary life. But inside, my pulse was steady and cold. Tonight was not ordinary. Tonight was a reckoning. I folded my napkin in my lap, my hands calm. After a few polite exchanges about their trip, the weather, and trivial things, I leaned forward slightly. My voice was even, almost gentle. You know, Matthew, I keep thinking about your message. The one about keeping things just in the family? Matthew glanced at Emily quickly before answering. His smile faltered, then reappeared, thinner this time. Oh, Mom, you know we didn't mean anything by it. Just logistics. Trips can be complicated. Emily nodded, tilting her head. Exactly. It was nothing personal. We just wanted to keep it simple. I let their words hang in the air for a moment, then placed my glass of water back on the table deliberately. Simple. That's a word you two use often. Like when you asked me to sign papers to make things easier. Like when you called the transfer of my house a simple family gesture. Emily's lips tightened, though her smile stayed fixed. Her fingers tapped lightly against her wine glass. I continued, my tone calm but firmer now. And yet, simple has turned complicated. Because you see, I discovered something. Something about a second mortgage application. The air shifted instantly. Matthew's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide. Emily's fingers stilled. The din of the restaurant carried on, but at our table, silence roared. "Mom," Matthew said carefully, "I think you must be mistaken." Emily leaned in, her voice smooth, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "Yes, that sounds like a misunderstanding. Maybe a clerical error at the bank." Without a word, I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin envelope. I placed it on the table, the paper whispering against the linen as it landed. I slid it toward them slowly. Inside were copies of the pre-approval documents Harris had uncovered, along with printed screenshots of transactions flagged under Emily's name. The envelope looked small, but I saw Emily's eyes track it like a predator recognizing a trap. Her hand twitched, as if tempted to reach for it, but she didn't. I spoke softly, almost tenderly. "I brought evidence, so there wouldn't be any confusion." Matthew's face flushed. He glanced at Emily, then back at me, searching for the right words. This must be some kind of mistake from the bank. They probably filed it wrong. Before I could respond, a waiter approached our table. He carried a small notepad, his expression polite. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Gardner?" I nodded. "There's a call for you at the front." "From your attorney?" The words hung in the air like a verdict. I didn't move. I simply looked across the restaurant, toward the corner booth. Dalton lowered his newspaper slightly and gave the faintest nod before lifting his glass to his lips. Matthew's eyes followed mine, and I saw the moment it landed. His jaw tightened, his shoulders slumped. He understood. Emily tried to recover, her voice brittle. "There's no need to involve lawyers, Olivia. We're family. This could have been resolved quietly." I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers. "Exactly. That's what I've been offering all along. Quiet resolution. But you mistook my quiet for weakness." The tension at the table was a living thing now, coiling and stretching. Silverware clinked softly against plates as other diners carried on, oblivious. The contrast was surreal. Around us, normalcy. At our table, war. I placed my hand gently on the envelope. "I'll give you one final chance. Withdraw your access. Remove your name from my accounts. Repay what you've taken. And never, ever attempt to sign another paper in my name. Do this voluntarily, and it stays between us. Refuse, and every page in this envelope will become public record." Emily's smile cracked. For the first time, she looked less like a polished strategist and more like someone cornered. Matthew shifted in his chair, his voice low, almost pleading. "Mom, please, don't do this." I met his eyes. "Don't do this?" "Matthew, I didn't do this. You did, by standing silent, by letting her move pieces while you looked away." The table shook slightly as Emily set her wine glass down too hard. Her facade was unraveling. "This isn't fair. We were just trying to secure a future. For all of us." I let the words pass, then spoke with measured clarity. "A future built on deception isn't security. It's theft." The waiter returned briefly to refill water glasses. The sound of liquid pouring into a crystal was almost too loud. When he left, silence returned, heavier than before. Matthew ran a hand over his face, his voice trembling. "What do you want from us?" I straightened, my voice calm, final. "Respect, boundaries, and accountability." For a long moment, no one spoke. The envelope lay between us, thin as a blade, gleaming faintly under the overhead light. The condensation on my water glass trembled as my fingers tapped once against the table. Dalton folded his newspaper, rose, and walked past us. He didn't stop, didn't glance, but his presence was enough. A silent reminder that I was no longer alone. Matthew slumped back in his chair, his fight gone. Emily stared at me, her eyes burning with fury she couldn't unleash in public. I lifted my napkin, dabbed the corner of my mouth, and stood. "Thank you for coming. Dinner is on me. But consider this your last free meal at my table." I left them sitting there, the envelope still between their untouched plates. As I walked toward the door, I felt the weight of the restaurant's quiet civility around me. No raised voices, no broken glass, just control, mine. Outside, the night air was cool against my face. Harris fell into step behind me, silent, his phone sliding into his pocket. Dalton's car pulled away from the curb ahead, his taillights glowing steadily. For the first time in a long time, I felt taller. I had faced them not with screams, but with proof, not with tears, but with boundaries. And in that quiet confrontation, I realized something. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers across linen and glass, sharper than any blade. The night air after that dinner felt clean in a way I had not felt in years. I walked with my back straight and my bag light against my shoulder, and when I reached my car, I did not start the engine right away. I simply sat and listened to my own breathing. Across the street, the restaurant windows glowed a soft gold. Inside those walls, I had spoken without raising my voice, and the world had tilted in my favor. What they did not know yet was that the tilt had begun days ago, while their ship sailed toward blue horizons, and I stayed on land and turned paper into power. I will tell you how it happened because I want this part to be clear. I did not stumble into luck. I did not rely on apologies or messes of emotion. I chose rooms with fluorescent lights and unromantic chairs. I chose desks where the only music is the click of a pen and the soft thud of a stamp. I chose people who write their names as promises and then make those promises real. It began the morning their car left for the port. The suitcases in their trunk were glossy and new. Emily had texted me a photo of her sun hat and a caption about ocean breezes. I did not reply. I drove past the highway exit that would have taken me to the docks and instead turned toward Mr. Dalton's office. He had already set the table for war. When I arrived, he pushed a stack of forms toward me with the same calm he brought to every meeting. I read every line and then signed my name with a hand that did not shake. We filed to revoke the authority I had given away last spring. We filed a notice that any future powers would only be valid if I signed in ink before a notary of my choosing. We filed a statement of intent that documented manipulation in plain words, with dates and witnesses, and the little details that make judges lean forward. Then came the deed. Even the word felt heavy. The house had been my mistake and my gift and my lesson. Dalton spoke with careful patience while I listened to the steps. It was not magic. It was a sequence. First, we assembled proof that the gift had not been a simple act of generosity in a vacuum. We pulled emails. We gathered messages. We added notes from my advisor about suspicious transfers. We attached Mr. Harris's early findings about second mortgage inquiries and pre-approval footprints in databases that keep better memories than people do. We attached the envelope Emily had slipped beneath my door with the request that I surrender my life in the name of convenience. The pieces formed a path that any reasonable person could follow. Coercion can be a hand on a shoulder that looks like comfort. It can also be a stack of paper signed after a series of soft pressures and practiced smiles. The law has ways to see the difference when the story is told with dates and signatures and calm. Dalton sent a messenger to the county recorder with our petition. We waited in his conference room under recessed lights while the copy machine breathed out duplicates that smelled like toner and resolve. Waiting has always been hard for me. I used to fill the space with worry. That day I filled it with breath, in and out. The receptionist brought water in tall glasses that clicked gently when we set them down. At last, the messenger returned with a page stamped in red. I will never forget the sound of that page hitting the table. Soft as a wing, heavy as a bell. Recorded, there it was. A word that meant the earth had shifted a few inches beneath our feet. Here is something I did not expect. The moment I saw the stamp, I did not feel giddy or vindictive. I felt relief so deep it was nearly quiet. For months I had been bracing and apologizing and smoothing the surface of a life that was already cracked. The stamp did not erase the cracks. It simply said I could stop holding the surface together with my hands. We did not stop there. Dalton had arranged calls with a title company that handles quick sales when buyers have cash and do not need to dance with the timelines of lenders. A young couple had been looking in the neighborhood for months and had been outbid again and again by investors with faster pens. Harris's network had found them. They had saved for years, and they were ready to move as soon as the right door opened. The door was mine to open now. At the title company, the conference room was small and efficient. A bowl of peppermint candies sat in the center of the table, as if to sweeten the taste of signatures. The settlement agent was a woman with a steady voice and a binder tabbed in colors. She slid disclosures toward me and explained them one by one in plain language. No rush, no trick. It was the opposite of the day. Emily brought a notary to my kitchen and smiled at me through words I had never read. I asked questions. I got answers. We read line by line together until the paper and I understood each other. The buyers arrived a few minutes later. They looked younger than my son. They carried nervous hope on their shoulders. The woman clutched a folder of pay stubs and letters, and the man kept squeezing her hand as if to confirm she was real. When the agent asked if we were ready, I nodded. The man caught my eye with a gratitude that did not yet have words. The woman wiped a tear, laughed at herself, and said they had promised not to cry in front of strangers. I told her that strangers only stay strangers for a moment in rooms like this, and then they become part of your story, whether you planned for it or not. We signed. They signed. The agent took the papers away to copy, and when she returned, she placed a small key ring on the table. My key, their key, a bridge between what was and what would be. She slid it toward me first. "This is yours to pass," she said. I took the key in my palm. It was warm from the light. I thought of the day I had handed a set of keys to my son and how weightless he had looked, as if the future itself had picked him up and carried him. I thought of the day I would not think about that memory anymore. I turned to the young couple and placed the key in their open hands. "May this house redeem itself," I said quietly. "May it hold only honest dinners and true apologies and the kind of quiet that heals." They thanked me in voices that broke in the middle. We were all a little undone. The agent smiled and slid 2 envelopes across the table. One held copies for me. The other held the closing documents for them. I tucked my envelope into my bag, and the woman tucked hers to her chest as if it were a child. The man asked if he could take a photo so they would remember the exact moment they became homeowners. The agent obliged, and we stood together in front of a wall with a framed map of the county, and smiled. I have taken happier photos in my life. I have never taken one that felt so exact. Money moves without drama when you do it right. The wire arrived in an account Dalton had helped me set up with protections so tight they squeaked. No linked users, no automatic authorizations. Every withdrawal requires my signature in ink. Every transfer requires a conversation with a human who knows my voice. It felt old-fashioned. It also felt like choosing doors and locks with intention. Richard would have approved. When the confirmation arrived, the agent slid a final sheet toward me. She pointed to a line, and I saw the word again. Recorded. I pressed my fingertips against the ink as if to test its honesty. It did not smudge. That night I drove home by a different route. I did not want to pass the house I had let become a stage for a morality play I never auditioned for. The tires hummed on familiar roads, and I did something I had not done in a long time. I sang under my breath, a hymn Richard had loved when he drove at dusk. It was not about faith in people. It was about the patience of the road and the mercy of endings. Over the next few days, Dalton assembled the packet that would become the quiet threat in my bag. Evidence. That simple word carried a world in it. He included a timeline laid out with calm precision. He included copies of the transactions that had bled my accounts in small cuts. He included a note from Mr. Whitaker confirming the authority Emily had used under the first document I had signed and the measures I had taken to rescind it. He included screenshots of the pre-approval records tied to the house that no longer belonged to them. He included a copy of the envelope with Emily's cheerful handwriting, inviting me to sign away my breath. At the end, he inserted a cover letter that did not boast or accuse. It stated facts and sentences that landed like stones. If they chose to contest anything in court, this packet would be the first chapter the judge would read. I kept one copy in my kitchen drawer. I kept the other in my bag where the brass lock rested like a small heart. I touched the metal sometimes without meaning to. It steadied me more than any prayer I could have spoken. On the morning of the dinner, I woke with the evenness that comes from a plan that is already in motion. I brewed coffee and watched the steam rise and disappear. I dressed not in anything dramatic but in a simple blouse that Richard had always said made me look like myself. I slipped the thin envelope into my bag and the heavy lock into my pocket. The weight of those two objects told the whole story. Paper and boundary, mind and line. At the restaurant, I felt every step was a choice. Sit facing the door so I could see them enter. Place the bag where my hand could find it without drawing attention. Breathe evenly. Smile politely, listen more than I speak, and when the moment came, set the envelope down with care so the paper would whisper against the linen and say what I did not need to shout. You know how the dinner ended. You know that I left them at that table with their polished cutlery and their shrinking confidence. What I did not tell them inside that room was the part that mattered most. Not only had I taken back the deed, not only had I revoked the authority they wielded, the house they thought of as an asset waiting to be leveraged was already gone, sold, paid for, recorded in a county book that does not listen to tears. The keys were already in the pocket of a couple who cried honest tears and then laughed at themselves for crying. As I drove away from the restaurant, I stopped at a red light and looked in the rearview mirror. My face surprised me, not because it looked younger. It did not. It looked exactly my age. It looked like a woman who had finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in her own life. I touched the envelope in my bag and then the lock in my pocket. For a moment, I imagined Matthew and Emily walking back into a driveway that no longer welcomed them. I imagined the moving truck backing up with a beep that sounded like a metronome and a realtor holding a clipboard. I imagined their confusion tipping into panic and then into something that might one day look like understanding. I did not wish them cruelty. I wished them clarity, the same clarity that had cost me so much to earn. When I reached home, the house greeted me with the hush that follows a storm. I put water on the stove and set the lock on the counter where the light could find it. I opened the kitchen drawer and placed the envelope carefully on top of the other copies. I am not a sentimental woman about paper, but I have learned to love it when it protects me. I made tea and carried my mug to the window. From there, I could see the little square of sky above the maple tree. It looked ordinary. I took a slow breath and let it out. The breath did not catch on pain. It moved through me clean. Sometimes the repair is loud. Hammers, saws, men on ladders. This was not that kind of repair. This was the kind where you sit very still and sign your name in the right place and then wait while stamps dry and wires land. This was the kind where you choose not to announce each victory because you do not need applause to validate a boundary. The quiet itself is the validation. Late that evening, Mr. Harris called to confirm that the wire had cleared and that the second mortgage attempt was now moot. His voice carried the satisfaction of a craftsman admiring clean work. He said he would deliver an updated report to Mr. Dalton in the morning with tidy summaries. I thanked him and then asked about something that had been hovering at the edge of my thoughts. Do you ever get used to watching people you love become people you have to defend yourself against? He did not rush his answer. No, ma'am, you do not get used to it, but you do get good at not confusing love with access. I held the phone to my ear a little longer after the line went quiet. I wanted to keep that sentence with me like a stone in my pocket. Before bed, I stood at the empty shelf where the family photo used to hang. The outline in the dust had faded since the day I took it down. The wall looked clean, honest. I did not feel triumphant. I felt aligned. Richard had once told me that the right choices often feel like grief and relief holding hands. I understood that now, in my bones. The next morning, I woke before dawn and did something I had not done since Matthew was a boy. I made pancakes for myself, just one plate. I set the table as if I were a guest in my own home, and I sat and ate slowly, butter and maple syrup and a sun that lifted itself over the roofs. The first bite tasted like kindness. Not the kind I pour out until I am empty, the kind I give without making myself small. In my bag, the envelope waited. In my pocket, the lock rested. In the county, book a stamp dried. Somewhere, not far away, a young couple arranged their moving boxes in a living room that had been reclaimed for honest hopes. Somewhere on a ship that was already turning toward port, two people believed they were coming home to a world they still controlled. They were wrong, and I did not need to tell them so. The paper would speak for me. The stamp would echo. The keys had already announced the truth as they slid into a new hand and turned. The day Matthew and Emily returned was warmer than it had any right to be. The late afternoon sun stretched across the street, long gold shadows flickering over driveways and lawns that smelled of fresh-cut grass. I parked a short walk away and stood still for a moment, breathing the air that tasted of endings. In the distance, I could already hear the rumble of a moving truck, the metallic slam of its back gate opening, and the chatter of the realtor who gestured toward the porch of the house that once had been mine. Their car rolled into the street with the quiet hum of travelers who thought they were coming home. Two suitcases gleamed against the trunk, the kind sold in airport shops with dreams stitched into their zippers. Emily stepped out first, her sunglasses perched high, her smile ready to command. Matthew followed, phone in hand, scrolling, distracted, carrying the weight of luggage as though it were the only weight he knew. They had no idea yet. I watched them freeze when they noticed the truck in the driveway. A young couple stood with the realtor, signing final papers, their faces flushed with joy and disbelief. Emily's smile faltered, her head snapping toward Matthew. He looked up from his phone, confusion washing over his face in slow ripples. I stepped forward then, my heels tapping steadily against the pavement. Each sound was deliberate, each step erased years of silence. When they turned and saw me, Emily's eyes narrowed. Matthew's voice cracked into the warm air. "Mom." I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Behind me, movers carried boxes labeled kitchen and bedroom, their bodies passing like a rhythm of transition. I opened my bag and drew out two folders. One was thick with signatures, the reversal deed, and the sale documents. The other was heavier in a different way, evidence laid out like a trail of breadcrumbs leading to their own greed. I held them both for a moment before extending them. Emily's voice cut sharply. "What is this? Why are these people in our house?" Her words carried panic, but she wrapped them in authority as if she could command reality back into her hands. "Not your house anymore," I said softly. The movers kept carrying boxes behind me. The realtor called the couple, congratulating them on their new beginning. The world moved on while Emily's face flushed red. "You can't do this," she shouted, her voice cracking at the edges. "We have rights. Matthew, tell her this isn't legal." I placed the first folder into Matthew's hands. He opened it, skimming frantically. His eyes widened at the reversal stamp, the recorded sale, and the cash transfer confirmations. His hands shook as he turned each page. Emily grabbed the folder from him, flipping faster, desperate. "This won't hold up," she snapped. "We were managing things for your benefit. You'll regret this. You'll regret cutting us off." I held out the second folder. "This one is what you'll face if you try." She snatched it with the speed of fear. Inside lay the investigator's full report, every unauthorized transfer, every attempt at manipulation, the forged power of attorney paperwork she had slid under my door, the mortgage application filed without my knowledge, fraud, elder financial abuse, coercion. Her lips moved soundlessly as she read. Matthew finally spoke, his voice lower than I had ever heard it. "Emily, what did you do?" She spun on him, desperate. "Don't you dare put this on me. You were fine with it when the money came in, when we remodeled the kitchen, when we booked the cruise. You never asked where it came from." His shoulders slumped. For the first time, I saw in his eyes not the boy I had raised, not the man he pretended to be, but someone cornered by his own choices. His mouth opened, then closed again. He had no words. Emily turned back to me, her face pale beneath the sundae. "You can't destroy us like this. We're family." I took a slow step up onto the porch, my voice quiet enough that she had to lean closer. "If you truly believe you're safe, you won't mind if I make this folder public, will you?" Her jaw tightened. Her breath caught. The bravado in her eyes cracked. She clutched the folder to her chest like a shield that cut her palms. Matthew sank onto the porch rail, head in his hands. "Mom," his voice cracked, "I never meant for it to go this far." I studied him for a long moment. In another life, I would have cried hearing that tone, the one that echoed faintly of scraped knees and childhood mistakes. But today I heard the difference. Regret that he was caught, not remorse for what he had done. Still, something in me softened just enough to speak with care. "I am not filing charges today," I said slowly. "But I could. You know that." They both stared at me, confusion rippling. "Here is what will happen instead. You will revoke every claim you think you still have. You will attend counseling together, not for my sake but for your own. You will repay what you took, not because I need it, but because you must learn what earning means. And you will write me a letter of apology, notarized, not whispered behind closed doors, something you cannot deny later." Emily shook her head violently. "You're bluffing." I leaned closer, meeting her eyes without flinching. "Try me." The silence that followed was pierced only by the slam of the moving truck's gate. Behind us, the young couple laughed as they carried a lamp up the porch steps. Life continued, indifferent to Emily's unraveling. Matthew finally lifted his head. His face looked older, tired. He nodded once, barely perceptible, but enough. I slipped the brass lock from my pocket and held it in my palm. For years it had sat on my windowsill, a relic of Richard, a symbol of the home we once built. I turned it over once more in my hand, then tucked it back into my bag. Not on the sill anymore. Not guarding a threshold that betrayed me. Now it was mine to carry forward, not theirs to rest against. I took a deep breath and let the moment pass. Then I stepped down from the porch, my shoes clicking against the walkway. Emily's voice rose behind me in one last shout. "You'll end up alone." I did not turn back. "Better alone," I said softly, then used. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of fire. The movers carried in the last of the boxes. The realtor locked the door and handed the young couple their keys. And I walked away, my steps steady, the folders light in my bag, the lock warm against my side. I was not ending a family. I was drawing a boundary. And for the first time in years, I was free to decide what love would mean. Tell me, if you had been standing on that porch, would you have given them another chance? Or would you have let the evidence speak in court? The first morning in my new apartment felt like a clean page. The walls were painted a warm cream, and the windows opened toward a courtyard where children's laughter echoed faintly between brick facades. The air smelled faintly of coffee from a neighbor brewing too strongly, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to rush anywhere or brace for someone else's needs. This space was mine, wholly mine. No strings, no silent debts, no bargains disguised as affection. I had chosen this place with care. It wasn't large, just 2 bedrooms and a living room that filled with sun around noon, but it carried something priceless: sovereignty. When the movers set down the last box, I walked through each room, touching the edges of shelves and counters as if blessing them. I unpacked slowly, bringing out only the things I had chosen to keep: one potted plant Richard had given me on our 20th anniversary, the brass lock that had followed me through all these years of trial, and a handful of photographs I had sorted with deliberate mercy. There were no forced smiles in frames anymore, only truths. Once the apartment settled into me, and I into it, I made an appointment with Dalton again. This time not for defense, not for retaliation, but for planning. We sat in his conference room where the blinds filtered afternoon light into slanted stripes across the table. I told him I wanted to establish a revocable trust, not for Matthew or Emily, not for anyone who had gambled with my kindness, but for the causes and the people I chose myself. A scholarship fund for women returning to school at 50. A portion of the library where I had spent so many quiet afternoons. The rest was reserved with care, safe from prying hands. Dalton nodded with approval as he wrote. His pen moved with the gravity of permanence. And because I had learned the cost of misplaced trust, I appointed Martha as my healthcare proxy. She sat beside me in that office, her presence as steady as a stone in a river. She didn't protest or fuss. She only laid her hand briefly over mine when Dalton asked if I was sure. "Yes," I said. "Sure. If my voice is ever gone, hers will carry it." Outside of legal documents, healing asked for more than signatures. It asked for a purpose. So when the library posted a notice seeking volunteers, I answered. Every Wednesday afternoon, I stood at a lectern in the community room with a circle of women and a few men who carried the same lines of age on their faces as I did. The class was called Money and Boundaries, 55 plus. Not glamorous, not flashy, but urgent. We spoke of wills and accounts, of saying no even when the voice trembles, of recognizing manipulation when it dresses up as love. I told my story in fragments, never naming names, only naming mistakes, and the lessons wrung from them. The nods around me told me I was not alone. It was after one of these sessions, while I was packing my notes, that the librarian walked over carrying an envelope. "Hand-delivered," she said. "No return address." My stomach tightened when I saw the handwriting. Matthews. I waited until I was home to open it. The apartment was hushed except for the ticking of the small clock I had placed on the mantel. I sat at my kitchen table, the brass lock beside me, and broke the seal. The letter was written in his uneven scrawl, the same hand that once scrawled spelling homework at this very table decades ago. He began with, "I'm sorry." He wrote of confusion, of weakness, of letting Emily's ambition become his compass. He wrote of nights since their return when sleep would not come, when the silence pressed heavily, when he saw in himself not a son but a stranger. He admitted to knowing more than he ever confessed. He admitted to closing his eyes when the bank papers slid across the counter because closing them felt easier than questioning. He asked for forgiveness, not in grand strokes, but in sentences that stumbled and paused, as if the words themselves feared rejection. I read every line. I folded the paper once, then again, and set it beneath the shaft of sunlight spilling across the table. The ink gleamed briefly before fading back into stillness. I did not rush to reply. Healing is not a performance. Forgiveness, if it ever comes, must be more than words. So I left the letter folded, resting quietly in a drawer where it could wait without expectation. Life moved in gentle rhythms after that. Morning walks through the courtyard, evenings with books instead of arguments, Saturdays when Martha and I cooked together in my little kitchen. Sometimes I caught myself humming while washing dishes, surprised by the sound of my own contentment. The past did not vanish, but it no longer chained me. One afternoon, I sat by the window as the sun slanted in. The curtains I had chosen myself fluttered in a light breeze. On the table lay the folded letter, the brass lock, and my open notebook where I was drafting next week's class lesson. The three objects looked like a trinity of my life: regret, protection, and purpose. I touched each one gently, then leaned back and closed my eyes. Im lặng không phải yếu đuối. Silence is not weakness. Silence can be order. It can be the architecture of dignity. I breathed in, breathed out, and let that truth settle deep into me. Now I want to ask you, the one listening to my story, if you were in my place, would you open the door again for those who once discarded you? Would you risk another wound in the hope of reconciliation? Or would you keep the boundaries drawn, letting the evidence speak while you move toward peace? And tell me, would you choose to expose betrayal to the world, or would you hold it close, allowing the other side a chance to change in private? Share your thoughts in the comments, because these are not just my questions. They belong to anyone who has ever been underestimated, anyone who has ever been told their voice no longer matters. I am Olivia Gardner. This is my story, and now I leave the final choice in your hands. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.